Oh my BGS, what are you thinking? Hey everybody, thanks for joining me in my channel, Brutus on Baseball. Today's topic is going to be all about grading baseball cards and the recent announcements and then non-announcements from BGS grading services. BGS had a booth this past weekend at the Mint Collective event in Las Vegas, and what they rolled out was a new system for their grading, one that quickly had a huge amount of backlash in the hobby, and they essentially backtracked on their new grading system by the end of the weekend. Well, where we are now is that we don't know what their new system is going to look like. They said they're going to put out another press release by the end of this week to let us know what the actual new grading system is going to look like. Whether it's going to be similar to the old scale or the new scale that they just tried to put out there, no one knows. But I'm here in this video to talk to you BGS and to collectors out there and give you some ideas on what this could actually look like and how it could work. Before we dive in too quickly to the problem, let's give you a little bit of history here. Beckett Grading Services, BGS, is one of the three big trading card grading services that have been around for almost 3 decades. PSA is the first one, SGC is the second one, and BGS is the third. BGS started in 1999, but their brand and their name go way back further than that. For most of the history of grading, PSA has been the #1 company, but for the longest time, BGS was seen the #2. And oftentimes they were seen as #1 even when it came to ultra-modern cards in the 2000s and early 2010s. But in the last 5 to 10 years, BGS has completely fallen behind. And if you ask a lot of collectors, the reasons behind that is because the BGS team doesn't seem to have a whole lot of interest in the hobby. They haven't been present, putting things out into the hobby, communicating with the collectors, getting information. Most actions that they've been doing have actually been the opposite of what other grading companies have done. Customer service was non-existent for a lot of people. And for all of these reasons, the BGS experience has really been 2 different companies, depending on who you are. For those of us that collected in the 80s and 90s, the Beckett name meant a ton. It was the magazine at the time to get pricing for your cards. And the Beckett brand was huge in the industry. But for anybody that's come into the hobby in the last 5 to 10 years, you don't have that view of Beckett. The history that you probably have is more like a grading company that just doesn't care about the people in the hobby. And that is not a great image to be able to maintain a #2 space in the rankings. We've seen PSA pull away really big. They are the #1 company, and SGC has leapfrogged BGS in a lot of people's minds into that #2 role. Now for me, I have collected all 3 of these grading companies for as long as they've been around. We have PSA here, we've got BGS in the middle, and we've got SGC on the end here. What I try to do is, for every rookie card of a player I want to get, I try to get a highly graded copy in each of the grading companies. And that's because I collect the card, not the company. So to me, I never knew which company was going to be able to last the longest. And in the fear of something like one of them collapsing, at least I've got cards in the other grading company as well, so that I don't have all of my eggs in one basket. And in my opinion, to have a really healthy hobby, you need to have the competition between several different companies, not just 2. So if we don't have BGS really competing with the others, then we need somebody else to enter into the competition. But what Beckett had going for it was 2 main things. The first one that a lot of people like was the holder itself. A very clear, strong, sturdy holder and an inner sleeve. So inside that plastic holder, there's a soft plastic sleeve that the card goes into. Some people don't like it because they feel it actually interferes with seeing the card a little bit better. But if your concern is really protecting that card for the long term, then having that inner sleeve so the card doesn't move around in the holder is super important. The second thing that a lot of collectors liked about BGS, why they flocked to BGS, is the subgrades. You see here that there's a Gem Mint 9.5 grade, but each of the facets of the card gets a subgrade. So centering, edges, corners, and surface. Each one on here got a 9.5. And that way you can see what provided the Gem Mint grade for this card. One of the worst things about the other grading companies, it was when you get a card back from PSA and you get a PSA 7 and you thought it was going to be a Gem Mint 10, but you can't see any reason why it would grade so low. PSA doesn't provide any feedback on these different facets of the card. And so when you get something that's a 7, you're expecting a 10, sometimes you have no idea why that happened. But with BGS, you can see exactly why that happened. If you got 9.5s on everything, but the surface was a 7, you would know that you'd have to look at that surface really closely, and maybe you missed a line, a wrinkle, a crease, something like that you didn't see before sending it in. So at least you have an idea what's really good about the card and what the flaws might be. Now, when you look back at that picture of those Griffey rookies I had, you'll see that the grading companies use a slightly different scale. BGS has always used a scale of 1 to 10, but 9.5 was their gem mint card, and a 10 grade was reserved for a card that was considered to be in pristine condition. The other companies used a similar scale of 1 to 10, but PSA had a scale of 1 to 10 only, where 10 was the gem mint. They didn't have a pristine grade for their cards. SGC, on the other hand, also uses a 1 to 10 scale, at least they have for the last several years. And their gem mint is also a 10, with a gold label reserved for anything as pristine. So BGS is the only one that had a gem mint card showing as a 9.5. This was never an issue for collectors in the 90s and 2000s and even early 2010s. Everybody knew what was going on. A BGS 9.5 was equivalent to an SGC 10 or PSA 10. But with a lot of new people jumping into the hobby in the last several years, there seems to be a lot of confusion here about why BGS has a gem mint at 9.5. People seem to want to see that 10 grade when they get a gem mint. Now, I can't say that I understand this problem. One grading company's scale is similar to another's. A 9.5 can be equivalent to a 10. I get it. It's easy to understand. But a lot of people seem to have a problem with this. And for that reason, I can understand Beckett's interest in wanting to change their grading scale, which is what they announced this last weekend at the Collective. They threw out there that they wanted to start a new grading scale where a gem mint grade would be a 10. It would still give a pristine 10 grade, but then their new gem mint would be a 10 as well, so it could be equal to how SGC works with a 10 gem mint plus a gold label pristine. And then they'd be introducing this new intermediate grade of 9.5 mint plus, which is a grade that SGC has as well, but PSA doesn't. So if this does go through, I expect PSA will probably have to give in eventually and have a 9.5 mint plus grade as well. But all of that aside, I totally get the problem here with Beckett. If they want to stay relevant, they're going to have to update the grading scale and make sure that they can be equivalent to the others in the hobby. Otherwise, they're going to lose more and more market share. The driver behind the idea is solid. I get it. Let's do it. Let's update the grading scale. But what BGS did this weekend was to totally mess it up. And the issue that all the collectors have is the transferability of the old grading scale to the new one. Is about those subgrades that I showed you earlier on. Essentially, Beckett's new grading scale would be keeping that pristine condition, and then anything that has 3 9.5s and 1 10 subgrade would transfer over to the new gem mint 10 grade. But the problem becomes that if you had a gem mint with all 9.5 subgrades, which has always been seen as a solid gem mint card across the board, Beckett said that that would transfer over to the mint plus, thereby downgrading the card that you thought was a solid gem mint the whole time you've had it. So to attain the new gem mint 10 grade, you'd have to have at least 3 9.5 subgrades and 1 or more 10s. This upset a ton of people, and there was a huge backlash all at once on the same weekend. So much so that by the second day of that Mint Collective, BGS backtracked. And they said, hold on, we're not going to institute this like we said we were. We're going to go back, we're going to brainstorm, and we're going to get back to you in a week and let you know what the new plan is. Now, I will commend BGS here for taking a step back and actually saying, we're listening to the hobby. We know that this was not a popular decision. On the flip side, though, this seems to be BGS's MO. They say that they talk to people in the hobby, they have think tanks or whatever to figure this stuff out. But when it's released, they are completely tone deaf. It's like they have no idea how their decisions are actually going to land with the collectors. And when they go out and announce it, it's received horribly. And this is not the first time it's happened with BGS. So to give you a little example of what we're talking about here, I've got 3 of the same card. Carlos Correa's Topps Heritage rookie card from 2015. Now you can see here, we've got 3 cards. They're all the same. They all have the same label with 9.5 gem mint. But when you look closely at those labels, you'll see that the subgrades are different. Over here, we've got 2 9.5s, a 9 and a 10. In the middle, we have 3 9.5s and a 10. And on the right here, we've got 4 9.5s. Now, this has always been seen as the standard true gem mint, all 9.5 subgrades. So in everybody's mind, when you get a gem mint 9.5 with all 9.5 subgrades, you know that you're getting a gem mint card. But with Beckett's announcement this last weekend, what they're saying is that these 2 cards, the one that has a 9 subgrade and the one that had quad 9.5s, are now mint plus cards. And the one that has 3 9.5s and a 10 is the only one that actually remains a gem mint card. You can see why this is upsetting to a lot of people. There have been people out there collecting true gem mint 9.5s for a long time, and they're suddenly being told by the company that graded it that that card is no longer the grade that they gave it. It's now been downgraded to a 9.5 mint plus. So let's fix this problem. What do we need to do to make it work? Like I said before, I have no issue with the grading scale. If you want to make Gem Mint a 10, I understand the business reasons for doing so. But the problem becomes when you're transferring your old grading scale, the cards you graded previously, to the new grading scale. What the collectors have resoundingly said is you can't call something a 9.5 Gem Mint before and have it turn into a Mint Plus all of a sudden. That devalues a lot of people's collections for really no good reason. If you said it was a solid 9.5 Gem Mint before, why wouldn't that be equivalent to your solid 10 Gem Mint now? Your grading standards shouldn't have changed, just your labels. So how do we fix that problem? There's 3 different paths that you can go on here, and I'm going to summarize them here and give you my thoughts on the best one, and involve actually keeping the new grading scale, which I think is a great idea. It's going to be really similar to SGC's grading scale with the gold label pristine, the Gem Mint 10, the 9.5 Mint Plus, and the 9 Mint. It's working really well for SGC, so there's no reason that you have to deviate from the same model. So the first path that you can take is you can tell people anything in an old holder, if you want to send it in to be regraded with the new grading scale, we're going to crack it, we're going to look at it again, and we'll give it a grade based on the new grading scale. Treat everything old as being regraded. This is not going to land well with any collectors though. They don't want to have to gamble to see what they get based on the new grading scale. If it was a Gem Mint before, why isn't it a Gem Mint now? So that's the first path. The second path is anything that was a Gem Mint before, if you want to send it in with the new grading scale, new holder, it gets directly transferred to the new grade. So anything that had a 9.5 before will automatically become a 10. The problem with this is that collectors have always known that BGS 9.5s are not all the same. If you got 3 9.5s and 1 9, that's the lowest subgrade combination you can have to still get a Gem Mint. It's not equivalent to something that has 2 9.5s and 2 10s. And it's never been that way. People don't pay the same money for those 2 different Gem Mint grades from BGS. So why would we directly transfer them into the new grades? So what's the third path? And in my mind, the best one? Keep the grading scale that you got. Any card that was previously graded Gem Mint by BGS that has a 9 subgrade, that automatically becomes a Mint Plus card. We've all known this is the case, that Gem Mint cards that have a 9 subgrade have always been inferior to cards that don't have that 9 subgrade. And that's why we pay less for those cards every time out. The reality is probably that we've been buying Mint Plus cards that have a 9 subgrade, but BGS never had a scale to call it something different than Gem Mint. Now they do. And I would be totally on board knowing that all the 9.5 cards that I have from BGS that have a 9 subgrade are going to be a Mint Plus card, because that's always how I've kind of seen them in my head anyway. Not a big deal to me. But that means that your quad 9.5 Gem Mint from BGS automatically has to get transferred to a Gem Mint 10. If you don't do that, you're essentially saying that your grading standards have changed, and what you graded as a solid true Gem Mint last week no longer applies. That doesn't fly with collectors. And that is the way to lose trust with everybody in the hobby. So I can see an issue here for BGS, and it's how do you call something that has 9.5 subgrades a 10 Gem Mint? 9.5 does not equal 10. And I think that's where they were coming from, where you had to have at least one 10 subgrade to get the new 10 Gem Mint grade. In theory, it makes sense, but in practice, it just doesn't. And so what you have to do is you have to change the number system that you're using. 9.5 is no longer a Gem Mint. It's now 10. So anything that had a quad 9.5 subgrade has to now be a quad 10 subgrade. Simple as that. Your grading standards haven't changed, just the numbers that you're assigning to that grade. So this creates a problem, because what do you do about the pristines and the black labels that everybody loves so much about BGS? The pristines are the ones that have been reserved for the actual 10 grade. Well, now you're using the 10 grade for Gem Mint. So you have to come up with something different here. That's what SGC did with their gold labels. They had Gem Mint 10, and so they created a gold label, which looks the same with a 10 grade, except it's got that gold border and the pristine beneath the 10. Beckett's got to do the same thing. They've already released the label here that has the 10 with the pristine on it that's different than the 10 with the Gem Mint, so it's the subgrades that are the problem. What you need to do is you need to make the 9.5 equivalent to 10. And if you have a pristine grade now, you just call it a 10 plus. That way, when you have a pristine graded card, you're going to see at least 3 10 pluses and 1 10 on that label, knowing that you've got a pristine card. This solves the problem. 9.5 is now Mint Plus, 10 is Gem Mint, and 10 plus is pristine. So one remaining question that I've heard a little bit here, and that's cards that have been graded in the last number of years by Beckett that don't have subgrades. They introduced it as an option to speed up the service and not receive subgrades. So it's just a solid label that said Gem Mint or whatever grade you got. No one knows what the subgrades on this card is. So do you have a Gem Mint equivalent or do you have a Mint Plus now? Who knows? And that's the problem with these cards that have no subgrades. Buy at your own peril. You could be buying a Mint Plus card and you could be buying a Gem Mint card, and you won't know until you actually resubmit it. So my guess is if you have BGS cards with no subgrades, that's going to be selling for Mint Plus prices going forward. So you can either resubmit it, transfer it to another grading company, or just consider it Mint Plus going forward. Up to you. BGS, if anybody's watching from there, you are welcome for fixing this problem for you. Anything you want to do for me, like help me to promote this channel, get more subscribers, likes, views, anything like that, would be much appreciated because I'm really working hard to make that happen. For all you collectors out there, just stick with it. Keep collecting what you love and don't worry so much about the gimmicks of all the grading companies. Just sit tight, see what BGS has to say at the end of the week, and then make your decision in a rational way, whether you want to keep collecting BGS graded cards or crack them, submit them, cross them over to SGC, PSA, and maybe even CSG. In the meantime, keep talking baseball, take it easy, and we'll see you around.